This is Elizabeth and Elton Brewington with Discover Brightside, where we discover new people. Today, we're doing a very important moment to recover and talk about 9/11. And I have a woman who is a woman of substance, Gwen. And Gwen, I'd let you introduce yourself and thank you so much for coming on our show.
Oh, thank you for having me and Amy. Well, let me say a few things. One is, I listened to the colonel speak and I thought to myself, well, that's the military. I work with the civilians. I work with the families whose husbands and brothers and sons just went off to work that morning. No matter what their jobs were, they were civilians. Some of them had been in the service, but these were the civilians who were not talking about defending their country. They were just doing their work. Some of the ones from Cantor Fitzgerald were doing their stuff. They all were going to work and expected to come home that night to their families. So these were all people who had absolutely no preparation for what was ahead of them. The second thing I want to say is that I remember where I was when I saw the TV presentation of the planes both going into first the North and then the South Tower. I was up at my daughter's because she had a 3-month-old and her husband was away on business. And my husband called me from New York and said, turn on the TV. I think there's something you should see. So I turned on the TV and I see this scene in front of me, which I have to tell you, I'm a professional person. I have worked with families grieving. I could not wrap my brain around what I was seeing. Civilians at work in these towers being assaulted by planes. It was strictly surreal work. So I turned off the TV because I couldn't wrap my brain around it. My daughter then walked in just as the South Tower was being hit. And these firefighters were all walking into the South Tower in their heavy, heavy jackets and you know what they wear, the hats. And she said the most profound thing. She said, Mother, those men are never going to come out. And I hadn't wrapped my brain around that yet, that these men were all walking to their deaths. So this is my view of it. The sudden, unexpected, horrifying death of civilians, of people doing their work. A lot of the women I worked with, interestingly enough, because the World Trade Center was so poorly built, that's one of the reasons it went down the way it was, but the basement was very fortified. There was one woman who said, I work for the telephone company and I helped lay that basement. And believe me, those guys are down there, they're all walking around, they're going to the stores. There's no way that they died when the building went down because they were all safe in the basement. And so you entered the world of the magical thinking of the 9/11 survivors, the families that didn't have bodies, they didn't have any real evidence. Yes, the colonel talks about how they are still looking for remains. Well, I will tell you, my experience has been those remains were no comfort to these people. One woman said, how do I know that pinky you tell me is a pinky is my husband's? They had no reality whatsoever because they didn't have a body in front. They weren't able to have services. Some of them buried hats. So this was a horror compounded by a horror, not because they didn't know where they were. There was nothing to know. It was all evident. And the ones who went out the window, and that was another horror of seeing these poor people jumping to their deaths to avoid a death. What happened to their bodies? I will tell you, I worked with some of those families as an additional horror. So there was something about 9/11 that remained a situation where it wasn't just that somebody died. That's bad enough. That's bad enough if your husband, your brother, your son has died. But if they die in such a way that you have no explanation for it, you don't even know what happened to them. There were people who were wandering around New York City for months, still looking for their people thinking, oh, they escaped, they walked out, they're walking around the city, they have amnesia. So I cannot emphasize enough that this civilian death horror was beyond belief. It was like wartime when you see pictures of apartment houses being bombed. These families were going through that in a state of disbelief for so long that it prolonged their grief and their mourning because they could never say, he died here. This is where he was. They had nothing to show for what life had brought, except somebody's words saying, this is a remnant, this is a piece, this is his helmet. So my vision of this horror is a little different. And I will tell you that it is hard for me to sometimes put together, how do you tell your child, Daddy went to work and bad people bombed the building he was working in? Those weren't just bad people. There was nothing to feel proud about that you had survived this. There was nothing to feel brave about that your family was wiped out and shattered. They were left in a limbo with nothing except their sadness, their horror, and their anxiety about what's going to happen next. And I will tell you, when you talk about 8 years, you talk about 24 years. For these families, the mourning went on for years and years and years, and to some degree still goes on. I have clients, I still see some of these people, and I still am in touch with them, who dread September coming every year because every year they revisit the anniversary of what it was that day that my husband went to work and said, I'll see you later, honey. And that was the end, and there was no proof that anything had really ever happened to him. So I have a different experience. And working with the grief and the crisis to these families took a lot for these families to be able to put themselves back together again and to have the hope that they would have a family life again. So I am like, I am the dark person in the room here because I don't see anything good that came out of that at all. These people built their lives because they had the courage and the desire to continue with their families, but there is nobody who feels good about 9/11 that I work with.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. On that note, I am going to bring my next speaker on, and I am going to stop. So if you feel Gwen's horror, and if you were in 9/11, write us a comment if you're watching this video. And if you have a story to tell, join us in the studio and let us know about it. And thank you for watching Discover Brightside.